I'm Effie Barker. We are right here in downtown Los Angeles. When you say we're not going away with these issues, what are those issues? Good evening. Welcome to the special edition of Ugnayan. I'm Effie Barker. So, good afternoon. This is Effie Barker, Human Interest. I'm your host, Effie Barker. It is election season again in the Philippines, and history could come in full circle. The upcoming election raised controversy because decades after former Philippine President and dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was ousted, his son, Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., is running for the presidency. The victims and abuses during the martial law regime are opposed to his candidacy, while the young voters with no memory of martial law or the torture and killing of political prisoners are in constant clash because of their opposing views. Joining us today via Zoom from San Francisco, California to help us examine and analyze the situation is an independent writer, activist, correspondent for Inquirer.net, and author of the book Women Against Marcos, Ms. Mila De Guzman. Hello, Mila. Thank you so much for coming for the show. And finally, we're here. I know you've been very busy.
Yes, yes. You are too. You are too, as a mother of a 2-year-old. Yes, thank you, Effie, for inviting me.
Okay, Mila, hot na hot ang Philippines today. I wanted to know what are the young Filipinos' thoughts are. So I've been reading in social media recently, and I was stunned with the popularity of Bongbong Marcos. And not only that, many of them are very passionate of what they believe in. Uh, Mila, what do you think is happening here? Can you help me explain his current popularity? And maybe you can help me also explain to the young generation why we should or we should not vote for him.
Okay, first of all, yeah, I'm glad you pointed out how the young people, there seems to be a popularity, wide popularity among young people to vote for Marcos Jr. I prefer to call him as Marcos Jr. Okay.
Okay.
First let's talk about the kind of electorate we have now. When Marcos was overthrown in 1986, the population of the Philippines was only 55 million.
Mhm.
Now we are over 100 million. So for about 35, 36 years, the population has doubled, and now we have a very young population. And in fact, 56% of voters in the Philippines are between the ages of 18 and 41. So you are actually one of these young voters, okay, who will be going to the polls. And there hasn't been any kind of systematic education about martial law in the Philippines. So you are facing young people who did not live through martial law and who did not have enough education about what happened during that time, and who are susceptible to a lot of disinformation on social media, because that's how they consume the news now, right? Through social media. So and let me also point out that the disinformation has been going on for at least the last 10 years, even more. In fact, it's been reported that Marcos Jr. Hired Cambridge Analytica to help rebrand his name. So they prefer the more affectionate Bongbong Marcos or Bongbong instead of Marcos Jr. because the Marcos Jr. gets him associated right away with his father, who ruled as a dictator. It's been reported that Marcos Jr. is the one who has benefited a lot from this information, while Leni Robredo, his main opponent for the presidency, has been targeted the most by the disinformation. So you are faced with a candidate who has been very active in trying to clean up his name and the legacy of his father in the last decade or so. And we are faced with a population that has been consuming a lot of disinformation, okay, on social media. And in fact, Marcos Jr. has branded his father's legacy as the golden era in Philippine history. Okay, so I argue that that was a golden era for the family of the Marcoses, as well as their friends and cronies, because of the way they were able to enrich themselves in office. But it was not a golden era for the ordinary Filipino people. So there's a lot of factors that that seem to make him high up in the polls. But we also should not forget that they have a lot of trolls. The Marcoses have army of trolls that whose main work is really just to populate populate the social media with all their uh, lies about the Marcoses, or about Marcos Jr., about his achievements, so-called achievements, and how he is now the victim of fake news. So that's a very deadly combination if you look at it, and which put him up in the polls. However, I don't I don't depend mainly on the polls, because in 2000 in 2016 he was high up in the polls when he ran for the vice presidency, but he was defeated by Lenny Robredo, who is now his main opponent for the presidency. So, am I believing that because of the polls, his victory is inevitable? I say a big no. Okay, we don't know, but because of the way Lenny Robredo has been getting a lot of support lately.
If it's working for the BBM using these new media, why don't you use that medium as well to give information?
I think just from natural, looking at all the sites that are supporting Lenny Robredo, I am quite impressed at the way the volunteers, if you look at all the sites now that are supporting Lenny Robredo, they come out with the most catchy responses.
Is it working? And I mean, is it changing the minds of these young generations, the ones who's going to vote?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. I'm hoping it would. Um, there have been talks about, because of this press conference, some of the supporters of these candidates have suddenly turned over to the Lenny camp. So I don't know how effective it would be, but the mere fact that some of these people are just so disgusted with the way these male candidates came out in that press conference, with their sexism, with their, with the kind of attacks that they launched on Lenny Robredo, they have changed their mind and have joined the campaign for Lenny. As for the young people, I'm not, it's hard to tell at this point. But I'm hoping that, like 2016, people will be surprised at how the turnout would be, because Lenny Robredo was then behind in the polls, and yet she was able to defeat Marcos Jr. for the presidency.
I've read some comments na parang the generation who had experienced the martial law, it was the responsibility to tell the history, and it was the responsibility to teach the young generation na parang feeling nila napabayaan. What do you think of that?
No, I completely agree with you. I think there was a directive during the administration of Cory Aquino, who replaced Marcos after the People Power Revolution, to really have to include in the curriculum of schools teachings about what martial law really meant. But it's been over 35 years. So the New York Times interviewed a young woman, okay, about the election, and she said, "Well, I really don't care anymore about what happened during martial law. I don't read books, okay. So she just depends on social media. So it breaks my heart, because it also shows you the kind of educational system that 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 our country has neglected,
That's what I'm
and that
saying.
there's no more.
If these TikTok videos for like 3 seconds, I've seen one where it showed uh the greatness supposedly during the Marcos
Mhm,
regime, and then one celebrity posted it in a wall and said, these are the kind of videos that we should be posting. See, I've learned so much now after. Then somebody commented in the bottom that, wow, she just watched a 3 minute video in
mhm,
TikTok, she feels now she knows everything. So my
mhm,
point in telling you this is like, bakit hindi gagawin yung effective,
mhm,
because it's effective for a 3 minute 3 or to 5 minute video, you know.
mhm. I don't have a full breadth of the kind of but I agree with you. The Marcos Junior campaign has been using TikTok videos, Facebook, and even YouTube. There seems to be, as I said earlier, a creative, very creative videos about uh, against the Marcos Juniors. All exposing his so-called educational achievements, exposing the remaining um, billions of pesos of taxes that the family owes. Um, the kind of um, that he was actually convicted in 1995, I believe, for tax evasion, and yet he was able to escape jail term. He was, I think, sentenced to about 3 years in prison. So all these are coming out again. So it's for me, it's like deja vu from the 2016 his 2016 campaign, because then again a lot of information about the about martial law and his family's misdeeds came out. So I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure about the balancing of how the Marcos Jr. and the Robredo campaigns are doing in terms of TikToks and Facebooks. Okay, but I see quite a bit of
Mhm.
videos coming from the Robredo campaign as well.
Right,
But I agree with you. They have a lot of resources,
right.
Effie. They still have the money that they stole from the government. It hasn't been, most of it has not been recovered by the Philippine government. So.